Good evening and welcome to our presentation tonight, Back to School Anxiety. And really we'll be focusing on how to fight the back to school anxiety. We know this year is a very unusual year and there's probably more and different anxiety than before. I'm very, very happy to have Kohnen here tonight with us to share her insights. And I want to tell you a little bit about Kara before we jump in and I pass this over. Just for anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Megan Trezza, founder of Jolla LearningWorks. And I know Kara has had a really interesting experience through COVID now and running a very, very full therapy practice. You guys are in person and virtual, or mostly in person now, right?
Yeah, we're both.
Yeah. So Kara is the clinical director at Grow Through Life Counseling and she's the licensed marriage and family therapist with over 18 years of experience working with children, teens, and families in behavioral health. She began Grow Through Life therapy in 2012, specializing in treatment for children, teens, and families. And she has some really cool areas of expertise that kind of overlap the work that we do at Jolla LearningWorks. And those include parenting, behavior modification, ADHD, learning disorders, and working with individuals with high functioning autism. She really enjoys working with younger patients and frequently works with families as part of the treatment process. And I want to say that's one of the things I really enjoyed when I was getting to know you in the very beginning, Kara, was just hearing about how you worked with the family unit and especially talking about anxiety and how that's not really something you can manage in isolation, especially for kids. You really have to deal with it as a family unit. And just kind of coming from a similar approach, and that we're always, bringing parents in to be part of the communication process and trying to make a link between what happens in our sessions and what happens at home. I just felt like that was such a good alignment with what we do as far as, being able to send families to you and just in having a lot of respect for your work. So with that, I will pass it over to Kara. And I'll let you guys know too, just real quick, we will have a little time at the end for questions and answers, and we'd love, to field your questions. You can use your chat box to enter questions. If you're unfamiliar with it, I'm sure most people are familiar with Zoom at this point in our lives, right? But just in case, the chat bubble is, it looks like a little talking bubble in the middle of your what's it called, like kind of navigation bar on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and it says chat. Just click on that and you'll open it up to a little window where you can add your questions. So feel free to just add questions there and we will go through those at the end. So Kara, to you.
Well, thank you, Megan. Thanks for having me tonight. I'm gonna go through the talk that I have prepared, hopefully with some really good hands-on tips for you, not just, first we'll talk about kind of normalizing all the craziness from this year, and then we'll do some hands-on parenting tips, and then which are hopefully practical things you can use right away. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about when anxiety actually falls into a clinical category and tell you a little bit about Grow Through Life, and then we'll have time for some questions. So can you guys see my screen, Megan? You good to go there?
I can see you. You're great. I'm gonna just turn off my sound here so you don't have any background noise from my 3-year-old who's playing with her grandma in the next room. But
okay.
Yeah, your screen is great.
Okay, perfect. So the first slide here talks about anxiety and how we think about it. So what people thinking of anxiety is feelings of nervousness and worry, of course. But what anxiety symptoms actually are include a whole host of physical symptoms and can look like other feelings, including irritability or guilt and shame, depending on your child. So I wanted to just illustrate that through these little pie charts here that we think of it sometimes as those two things, but then there's a whole host of other symptoms, including physiological symptoms of how it can manifest. For a lot of kids, that's going to be digestive or sleep problems as well. So back to school, not quite the new normal. And I've got this box in the middle of my screen that I'm not sure how to move. Can you guys see the box, or can you see the full slide? See the full slide? Okay. Okay, so challenges of what will happen this school year. So in California, we're still distance learning for the most part. But of course, we know at any point through the school year that could change, and that's bringing a lot of challenges for families. Of course, we have safety concerns upon return to physical school. We've got a lot of families considering alternative school or new school opportunities this year, which is where perhaps Jolla LearningWorks comes into play. We know that other kids are, certain kids are at higher risk, so lower socioeconomic, single parent households, limited access to technology. And so we're really sensitive to their needs, as well as kids under the special education support. We know that they're at a higher risk than other kids, and schools are having difficulty accommodating that. Also, with the funding impacted, we're gonna have some question marks about what staffing and teachers will look like, and also what school counseling departments will look like. So all of the pieces of the puzzle that bring us some security are up in the air right now. So a few more things to be concerned about, of course, families with kids at home and parents' work schedules, childcare. The learning styles, depending on how the child learns, can be severely impacted by distance learning. There's concerns about falling behind and not learning what's needed. Emotional support, of course, of being with teachers, staff, and other supportive adults. So kids we know are missing out on that. School events, sports activities. So that's probably what some or all of these things are probably what drove you here tonight. So I won't spend too much more time on these slides, but just to say that this is a really unusual time and that we're going through a lot of grief and loss, comparing what's happening now to what was happening in schools. And so this is a great time to kind of consider extra support. Anxiety exists as a protective mechanism. So when we were cavemen and women, this is back from evolution, we needed our anxiety to protect us. You know, we needed to be alert when we're sleeping in the cave to get up and run out of that cave if a wild animal was going to come and attack us. So we are all born with this fight or flight mechanism, and it's there to protect us. But when we have an overactive fight or flight or an overactive amygdala, we can see symptoms that are out of the norm. So what we know, though, is anxiety in the fall is pretty normal. There's clear signs that 44% of kids have trouble sleeping around the end of summer and fall, which we attribute to the upcoming change in routine. 2 out of 5 parents report they have concerns about their child's emotional well-being as they head back to school, and I assume that's even higher this year. Of course, we have fears of getting sick and social justice disruptions right now, making transition a little scarier for kids. And whether or not they're returning to a school building, hybrid learning, online learning, a lot of them are going to have some level of anxiety as a protective mechanism under a normal umbrella in that first couple of weeks of school. Anxious yet? Well, you've come to the right place. So we're going to move on from normalizing anxiety right on into the parenting tips. So I have 12 tips for you for back to school. The first one really is about communication within the family. So we want to admit to kids, and they kind of already know this, of course, that there are a lot of unknowns, but no matter what the unknowns are, you're going to be consistently there to support them. Also, reminding them of the other adults in their life that are supportive can be helpful as well, and who they can talk to when they feel like they need more support. So although there's a lot of things that are up in the air that we don't know for sure, we know 100% the reassurance will be there. So just reminding them that you're there and can reassure them and support them. We want to discuss possible scenarios, options, and alternatives. So talking about anxiety with your children doesn't make them more anxious as long as we move the conversation forward to a focus on problem solving. So we don't want to leave them just, okay, tell me about your anxiety and then let's do nothing about it. But let's move on to tell me what you're feeling and let's talk about the solutions. And then we know for sure that's supportive and decreasing their anxiety overall. The third one really is about modeling appropriate coping skills. So we know that wine and beer sales are up. So we know that more adults in the United States for sure are indulging a little bit more during this time, and want to just make sure that that's something that parents are looking at. Are you role modeling appropriate coping skills and showing your kids how to respond to future unknowns and building resilience? I always say I haven't met an anxious child that doesn't have at least one parent experiencing some anxiety, because kids will read their social cues from their parents. And so it's super common that anxiety can run in families, and that perhaps some of the messages they're getting from their parents are creating some safety concerns or some unrest. And so what you want to do is role model when you feel anxious, what do you do? And then give your kids examples of how they can do that. So I was feeling anxious. I don't know what's going to happen at my job or when I'm going to go back to the office. So I called your grandmother and talked to her about that. Is there somebody that you can call and talk to about how you're feeling about back to school, for example? So making sure your kids are seeing how you deal with anxiety and role modeling those appropriate skills that you want them to learn. Another tip for this back to school year is we want to demystify the changes and what will most likely take place when they're physically back in school. So this could look like potentially wearing masks for short times when they're at home reading or playing. And by now, most kids have been out, they've seen people with masks, they've started wearing them. So all of those are going to be having started doing that behavior at home is going to make that an easier transition when they do go back to school. Talking about getting their temperature taken, reassuring them that that's a good thing and why, and then also practicing that at home or practicing that, you know, I know Jerome's Furniture is taking temperature. We take temperatures when kids come to our office too, and we think that'll be something that's normalized. And we actually debated if we should do that or if that was going to be anxiety provoking. But we think a lot of the schools will probably do that, so we can actually help demystify that in the process for the kids that are coming into the office. And the more they see it, the more comfortable they get with that behavior. And, you know, I won't tell you exactly how old I am, but this is the first time in my life that I've gotten used to wearing a mask. And I can tell you, the more you do it, the more comfortable you get, right? So just making sure the kids are practicing that and they're comfortable with that and they have an understanding of why that's important. And then really, although resources are limited right now, we want to make sure that we have an understanding of what is available. So sometimes things are available online, and sometimes that actually helps access or convenience. So things like sports, clubs, social time, maybe teachers having office hours, peer support tutoring. This is also a time where if you have a child who you've been wondering now for a year or two, I wonder if there's a learning disorder. I wonder what's going on. I wonder why they're struggling. I wonder why they hate school. This is an amazing time to consider doing some psychoeducation testing. And I have some referrals for you in that department if you're looking to get your child tested. We don't offer that, but certainly that's very helpful when a child's in supportive counseling or professional tutoring services or in their school environment. And so sometimes that's something insurance will cover if the school isn't willing to do that. So this would be an excellent time, because what it will highlight for us is learning strengths and weaknesses and help us develop an education plan. So if they're particularly struggling, or they have been for years, and you're kind of scratching your head, what's going on, I would really implore parents to kind of think about getting that testing done now, so we have a better idea of what's happening and how we can be supportive in this coming school year. And then of course, school counseling, professional tutoring. I know for some families are really concerned about their child falling behind, and so are the kids or teenagers who want to prepare for their futures. And so maybe that's something you haven't considered in the past, but this would be a good time to consider investing in that, as well as to set the boundary of not just being a parent and not trying to become a tutor or a teacher. You know, I've heard a lot of parents say, "Oh, so much on my plate, I can't be a teacher as well." And so let's rely on our teachers and professionals who are really skilled at education to do that, and not have parents take on that role. And maybe that means bringing on some extra support this year. So one of the things that we do when a child presents in treatment is we give them a concrete skill that helps them remove the anxiety from their head and put it physically somewhere else. So one idea that I have for you, if you're thinking of some transition for school this year, is to consider maybe putting up a worry wall in your house where you write down your worries on a Post-it note and you stick those up on the wall. And that little activity of that expression of that worry and putting it somewhere else can actually take it out of their head and help them compartmentalize and leave that stuck to the wall. Another version of this that we've sometimes done is create a box, maybe a shoe box that kids can decorate, and that's their worry box. So before they leave for school, they put their worries in the box, or throughout the day, they put their worries in the box, and once they're in the box, they don't have to worry about them. And then when they have time to look in their box, they can get their worries out and process that. And then we might do that in stages where we put the worries in the box and then pull them out and write some potential solutions or some problem solving on the back of that post-it note or on the back of that worry, so that they're not just left with the worry, but they also have the solution. So as a therapeutic task, we might do that in stages. We might even do this as a family activity where mom and dad write their worries on the wall. And so it kind of normalizes that for kids and helps them put that in a proper compartment where once they stick their worry up on the wall or in that box, then they can release it and come back to it later when they're ready to worry again. So it helps us contain the anxiety sometimes to do something physical like that. And then if you have a religious family, sometimes religious families might call that their God box, where they put it in the God box, and once God has it, they don't have to worry about it. So it's a technique just to release it and set it aside so that they can move on with their day or focus on the next lesson or the next task ahead of them. One of the red flags for us, and tip number 7, is if your child is complaining about school or having difficulty getting their work done, a new issue is popping up in behavior or socially, we want to try to explore what is the root of that. So oftentimes we'll get kids or teens presenting saying they don't want to go to school. And this is a new thing, but there's usually something underlying that. And so what we want to do is figure out, is there a bully at school? Is it a teacher issue? As we know, teachers can definitely make or break school year for kids. And so if it's a great teacher, that tends to set the tone. If it's a teacher they're not really getting along with, we want to explore that too. Sometimes it's a matter of being overscheduled. Sometimes it's a matter of a change in the learning plan. And of course, that could be related to distance learning this year as well. And so we want to explore that and not just think, okay, my child's being defiant, but they say they don't want to go to school. Let's figure out the reasons why. And typically we can work with the school, the administration. We can figure out some problem solving to help that child with that, whatever that concern is. So number 8 is get some sleep. Kids need way more sleep than we think that they do. So kindergarten to 3rd grade, one of the sleep studies says up to 12 hours a night, and even high schoolers need a solid 8 to 10 hours according to the National Sleep Foundation. So quickly addressing things that impact sleep is something that we do when somebody presents to counseling as well. We know that that blue light of those social media screens tells the brain to stay awake. And so a lot of times if kids are on their screens or on their phones until late into the evening, they're staying up later and they're having a lot more difficulty falling asleep. So the recommendation by the sleep hygiene folks is to terminate that blue light on those screens at least a half an hour before you actually want to be asleep. And then maybe consider setting up a sleep hygiene where they shower in the evening, as that's a relaxing task. They read a paper book, they have a wind down time in order to slow down their thoughts, because a lot of times anxiety can drive sleep problems as well if they're worried about what's happening the next day, or if they feel like their schedule is too demanding, or they still have a to-do list to do. So really getting to the heart of like, what is the sleep problem and how can we solve it? And then making sure we're setting up that structure, boundaries, and bedtime, because teenagers don't quite have that frontal lobe with that impulse control fully developed yet. So they might need some structure and some support around having Wi-Fi shut off at a certain time or checking their phone in, so that we know for sure they are off of their screens and getting to bed at a reasonable time. Number 9 is to plan ahead for the week. So I love the idea of just a plain old school whiteboard where if your kids are old enough, maybe they write their schedule up so it's not a parent intensive activity. But consider a visual to keep the whole family informed where everyone is going to be and what the schedules are for the week. So this prevents a lot of that mom that can decrease parents' frustration tolerance. If the schedule is posted where everybody can see it in the house and kids are kind of managing, putting their stuff up there, That's a great way to relieve some family stress and to communicate without actually having to verbally prompt or get reminders all the time. Number 10 has to do with teacher relationships. So if the teachers, once again, kind of going back to the idea that the teacher can make or break a year. And one of the things that often is deteriorated when we have a teenager present to counseling is that they don't have a great relationship with their teachers. But what we know for sure is that if teachers know that a child is motivated and they want support and they're trying their best, then they're going to work with them. They're going to do what they can to support that child. And so for the most part, as long as it's a normal teacher. And so what we work with the teenagers is to get them to build a relationship with their teacher and stay in communication. Also having some empathy for teachers. I do have a client who's a teacher and she's like, oh, these parents, they're just gonna come for my jugular. She's really worried because there's been a lot of changes that have been disruptive and there's not a lot of information out there. And so having some empathy for what your teachers are going through, that one in particular, she would love to be back in the classroom with her kids and is really waiting for that day. So, and I know a lot of parents are as well. So don't take it out on your teachers, all these changes, all the lack of communication from the schools. Let's work on building really healthy communication and healthy relationships with them. And then also giving them feedback. So they might not know that homework is taking way too long for your child or the parts of distance learning that aren't working out for your child. So make sure that that communication is open and encourage your child to build a positive relationship with their teacher as well. 11 goes back to the idea of the parents being concerned that they're going to be teachers this year. So one thing I want to encourage is to consider a separate homework time or a homework contract. So parents should not be acting as a tutor and should not be grading homework, redoing their kids' homework, right? What we really want to build kids' confidence is for them to do their work and feel confident in it. And if they need extra support, consider getting a tutor for that versus becoming in that role so that you have those clear boundaries and extra support this year. And then also building up that relationship with teachers is going to be really important. So maybe you build in a time in the schedule if you're writing up that whiteboard of when homework is supposed to get done. And a lot of times that's helpful if that's before they jump on the screens or try to spend some time with their friends, video games, all those kinds of things. So having that homework time built into the schedule where they know they have to finish it before they start doing fun activities. And then the last tip is really to try to have these wooden blocks because toddlers teach us what we need to know about play, that play should be done in downtime, that families should still be playing together, getting out in nature, really building in some fun time in the schedule, moments where families are face-to-face and not plugged into devices. So sitting down for family dinner when that's possible, having discussions, creating a game night, a night where you know for sure the family's going to sit together and connect. Of course, that could be a movie night once in a while, but we want to shoot for less screen time, especially with all the distance learning going on. So making sure that that's part of the schedule as well, because if we look up on a whiteboard and all we see is work, that's a little demotivating. But if we can see the fun stuff up there as well, that's a little more motivating for kids too. So how do you know when anxiety crosses into a clinical issue where you might consider doing some counseling? Well, I would say give your child a couple of weeks to transition. So some symptoms of anxiety, maybe some sleep or some, butterflies in the stomach or a little extra worry problems as they're getting used to the new school year and the new dynamic. That's probably normal. But if it's been more than a couple of weeks and it seems to be getting worse and not better in terms of symptoms, that might be a time to consider getting some counseling. Also new things, so low grades, refusal to get work done when that's never been a problem in the past. Those are some red flags that we might want to consider some treatment for. Younger children, we tend to see separation anxiety more frequently. And interestingly, because families have been home so much, that separation anxiety is occurring when parents leave the home. So it used to be the traditional separation anxiety was, mom takes kiddo to kindergarten, kid has a tantrum or a big reaction to mom leaving, and that's what we think of as traditional separation anxiety. But now sometimes it's kids are staying home and the parents are leaving to go to work and they're experiencing that same level of anxiety where they literally feel things are unsafe and it's not safe to be there without their parent present. So if they're having a big reaction in transition times, there's some things we can do in treatment to lower their anxiety and to give some tools. Um, and then social anxiety. So this generation of teenagers, unlike previous generations, statistically speaking, the research is showing us they are not getting together physically with their peers as much, which I guess was helpful now that we have COVID. But pre-COVID, they were not physically getting together. They were more connected online than ever before. So maybe they were talking to their friends via social media, direct messaging, texting, or playing video games and chatting with friends. They were less likely to get together than previous generations. And then when they would, we were seeing more social anxiety when they're physically meeting up in person to hang out. They also were showing less motivation to get up and out of the house at 18. And we think this has to do with some parenting styles. So if you have a very authoritative parenting style that tends to motivate as a 16, 17, 18-year-old to want to get out of the house sooner. But what we saw was a shift away from that where parents were more in a friend zone with their teenagers, and then teenagers were feeling very comfortable to stay at home as long as they need to not get their driver's license. Why would I need to do that? My mom's here, my mom will drive me anywhere. I could take an Uber, right? And so this actually seems to be driving some social anxiety rates because what we saw sort of normal behavior before as stages of independence are getting delayed further out, and then there's low or no desire to kind of make those independent steps. So that was a really interesting thing kind of coming across generationally. And then of course, right now we have all of the COVID considerations that we know coming back out of it. As people are connecting more in person, of course, with safe social distancing measures, they're experiencing a lot more anxiety leaving their home. So we expect rates of anxiety to be, it used to be around 10% to rise up to about 30%, given all the quarantine and changes we've had. There's also a diagnosis just called generalized anxiety, feelings of worry constantly with no known trigger. So this would be if 70 or 80% of the day you're experiencing some symptoms of anxiety without really knowing why. That could be under the generalized anxiety umbrella, and that you could definitely benefit from treatment for that diagnosis. And then also specific fears or worries. These can impact sleep, functioning, or other areas of life. So some specific fears you're probably familiar with might be like arachnophobia. So of course, when we were cavemen and women, we needed to be scared of the poisonous spiders and know which ones those were and get away from them. But if you're having, arachnophobia about the daddy long legs in the shower where you're screaming, crying, gonna move out of your house or never go into that bathroom again, that's probably an overreaction that we wanna look at for looking at that as a specific fear or diagnosable. So anytime any of these symptoms really impact functioning, and for kids and teens, functioning is academic functioning, social functioning, and kind of normal activities of daily living. So if anxiety is preventing normal behavior, that's when it crosses over into a diagnosable category. And then what should we do if that happens? This is our group room in our Chula Vista location. So what does supportive counseling do for kids? And first I want to emphasize it's really important to find a youth specialist. So there are a lot of licensed counselors out there that only work with kids a little bit or part-time, or they mostly work with adults. And for youth and families, you want somebody who knows different stages of development, who knows what's normal, what's abnormal, who also knows how to, as Megan mentioned, work with the family as a whole, as sometimes the parenting dynamic is playing a part in emotional development, and things that the family can do can be very powerful in helping treatment. So we want to make sure the therapist is inclusive with the family, that they're familiar with youth and youth needs. And then here are just some of the benefits that you can see from taking your child or your teen to counseling. So we work on coping skills, we work on reframing problems, we work on solution-focused thinking. We examine thoughts or past traumas which might contribute to current symptoms. We talk about resiliency and those skills, building confidence, self-esteem, assertiveness skills, and much more. And for me, I've always loved working with youth because a lot of times they come in a little more open, ready to get some work done. Not always, though. Sometimes it's the opposite, right? It's more parents that want the changes. But when we are able to work with them and provide them these skills, we can literally change the quality of their life for the rest of their life. And we can also change the trajectory of their relationships for the rest of their lives as well. So early intervention is always the key. If you're on the fence of, is my child too young, or no, like there is just, we work with all ages, bring them in earlier, they have much less suffering throughout their development, and we can give them great skills now. Here's our website in particular. So this is the front page of growthroughlifecounseling.com. In San Diego, we have 4 locations: Chula Vista, Scripps Ranch, Del Mar, Oceanside. We have a team right now of 33 and growing of youth specialists. So if you are interested in talking to Nicole in our intake department, our intake number is up there. You just hit extension 0 and you'll be transferred to her. Or you can go to our website here and fill out this contact information and she'll reach back out to you. You can also find all the information about each one of our team members, our locations. As Megan mentioned, we're doing both in-person and telehealth right now. So both options are available. We're using all the COVID precautions and social distancing measures for the in-person care. And lastly, one of my favorite quotes, "Don't just go through life, grow through life," was inspiring, of course, of how I named my practice. But I really believe that sometimes the toughest challenges can bring the most resilience and the most insight and awareness for our future and increase our gratitude. So hopefully we can take all these challenges and make it into something positive. So thank you so much for your time. And Megan, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have or anybody has.
Thank you so much. I love all the parenting tips, and they're some really, really good stuff. So if anyone has questions, please add them to the chat. I've had a couple things that I was thinking of as you were going through there. I was jotting down notes because I love these. I love the idea of the worry wall and making the concerns something more tangible. It was also, somebody just actually reminded me here, I was gonna mention, someone said they're interested in psychosocial testing. Is that something that you guys do?
So we don't provide that. We refer to licensed psychologists. We use Psychology 360, San Diego BrainWorks quite a bit.
Okay.
So yeah, so you can do full battery psychoeducational testing. So if you have educational concerns, IQ testing, all the strengths and weaknesses of learning, super, super helpful in education planning. So those are the 2 practices I would definitely recommend working with.
And I'll share in our follow-up email. We actually partner with Donica and her team at Psychology 360 to do psychoeducational testing. And we can, of course, just send people directly there if it's more straight, psychological testing. But we'll partner with them and we do the educational part of the testing so that we can more seamlessly then transition that child from the evaluation to an intervention program. And then, we work with Donica, and she, kind of includes us in her process, when she has a diagnosis, so that we know better how to then support that child. So it's actually been a really fun partnership that we kicked off, and we've actually been doing pretty successfully now through this COVID time. We started it right before COVID hit, and Donica's office, I know, is seeing patients in person, so they do their part of the testing in person. We are doing a little bit in person, and we've also done a lot of them virtually, and it's actually worked out great. So that's something I can send you guys information on in our follow-up. Any other questions from our audience? I'll give them a second here. I'm looking back at my notes because I know I had so many things that I thought were so great. One thing I was going to just kind of add to, because I've been listening in on the San Diego Board of Education weekly Zoom calls on just like what their status is and applying for waivers and whether the school procedure is going to be. And you mentioned, I love that idea of, making sure you talk to your child and kind of practice the things that might, be part of their routine going back to school. And I just wanted to add, I feel like there could be that fear from a child of, wait, what if somebody gets sick at school? And just so parents are aware, that's part of all of the reopening plans that the schools have to detail. And actually, I spent about an hour today listening to them all talk about processes for communication. If one person, in a school, in a classroom, anybody has a diagnosis, symptoms, anything like that, they're going to have really tight plans in place for how to notify families, everyone who's been in communication, anyone who's been around somebody who has come down with, COVID or COVID-like symptoms, they're going to be asking to have them quarantine for a period of days until they feel that it's safe, where they can determine that that was not a COVID situation and it's safe for them to come back to school. So hopefully that might help to alleviate some concerns. And then the one other piece is that I think to just acknowledge the possibility that if schools do open for in-person, they may close again and not be able to offer in person, and that may go back and forth. And so I think just to, kind of prep your kids in that vein of giving them an idea of what to expect, that they may go back to school, but it's not going to be, first of all, it's not going to feel like school that they're used to, because they're likely not going to be going back like full time, but with more of these hybrid models where they'll go back, part of a day so that they can keep groups of students down to the recommended, minimum for interaction within a certain space. So they, if they're going back to school, it may be in more of like a cohort. So, smaller groups, different days, everybody may be doing this differently, but it's hard to prepare your kids when everything is unknown and teachers don't know and parents don't know and the schools still don't know. But those are just some of the things I've heard more from kind of the inside that may be helpful to pass along to kids.
Yeah, totally.
We do have another question here. So someone's shared, we let our 9-year-olds play video games this summer with their friends online, and now they seem to be having withdrawals. School started today. Suggestions to ease the change back to school mode. That's a really good question.
Yeah, and with some of these things, there's not 100% right or wrong answer. I think what we want to try to do with screen time is determine what is, quote, good screen time versus not so great screen time. Part of the way we differentiate that is what's going on neurologically in their brain. So if it's a new novel activity, let's say a learning tool, or they're in school on their screen, we would consider that a pretty much a home run for good screen time because their brain is active and they're learning, they're building different parts of their brain depending on what they're learning. So something like a video game, it could get split down the middle a little bit. If it's social time, of course, we want kids to have appropriate social time. So there's that sort of gray area. But if it's a video game they've played a million times, it's not challenging them cognitively, then their brain goes into delta theta waves, which is not great. It's not developing anything new, and it's just kind of zoned out. So if you've ever just like Netflixed for a while, or you're kind of like, hey, what hour is it? How much time's gone by? Your brain has been in that delta theta wave pattern for a certain amount of time. And so we just want to limit that time because we know that they're not actually learning new things. But it becomes a bit of a gray area, I know, when there's social time. So if you're going to do a family calendar or schedule, I would just figure out how much time you feel is appropriate, and that could vary by your child's maturity level, what your child can handle, your child's irritability level, and build that into the schedule of these are going to be your connecting with peer time / game playing time, and have that up there so that they can look forward to it and then they know what to expect, and that should minimize some of the conflict. And then, that could be an area where you say, we're going to try this and see how it goes, but we might need to adjust it so that it's not just like everything this year, it might need adjusted. And then I know some parents during the school year really switch video games to the weekend. It probably depends on how heavy the homework load is and what the evening schedule is looking like, if that would be appropriate or not for your family. But yeah, so I would say that's the biggest factor, is trying to figure out if it's good screen time where there's learning involved versus not so great time for the brain.
Mm. And do you see and treat the real like video game addiction that they talk about?
So yeah, definitely there are reward centers of the brain. When we do brain maps and measure the electrical activity of kids that are on video games a certain amount of hours and who experience emotional distress when you take them off of it, in the same way an addict would in a kind of withdrawal scenario, we do see similar patterns of addiction within the brain. So like with any addiction, we want to try to mitigate the harmful effects and also mitigate any kind of withdrawal effects. So that's where creating the schedule, creating the expectation, creating the time limits, and looking at what's appropriate is going to be, and it's even more challenging, I think, when we're mixing in the social time, because of course we want kids to connect socially even through all this. So that could be a differentiating factor too, of if it's a video game they're playing alone versus a time where they get to communicate with their friends. So yeah, definitely we see it hits reward centers in kids' brains similar to the way that other addictions do. And so we want to be careful about overconsumption.
Thank you. We have time for a couple more questions if anybody else has a question there. I'm going to go back to my little list here of things I wanted to add too. Let's see. One thing I was curious about, Kara, is, thinking of just this time period being, to use the most common word of 2020, unprecedented.
Yeah.
Is that affecting your ability to kind of diagnose or discern, is it real clinical anxiety, or is it situational, or if it's showing up now versus any other time, is it still is valid, or is there anything to I guess is that important to distinguish in any way?
Well, yeah, I think because I started talking at the start of the presentation about how much stress we're all in and how normal anxiety is, that it can be confusing to say, is this normal or not? So if you're questioning it, then it's probably a place where you can benefit from support, even if it's not going to turn into a full-blown clinical anxiety disorder. There's sort of a catch-all category that we sometimes use when we're not sure, when we're still evaluating. And it's called adjustment disorder, and it can have features of mood disturbance, behavioral acting out, anxiety, or depression. And what has to happen within 6 months of that starting is a major life stressor. So at one point, I saw in the media, there was a therapist on TV saying, literally everyone in this country could be diagnosed with an adjustment disorder at this moment, based on what we've all been through these past few months. So my hope is one of the benefits that comes out of this is that everyone recognizes we all have mental health. We're all on a spectrum at any time. And that perhaps diagnosis isn't as important as, do you have the support you need? And if not, this is the time, whether that shows up as tutoring or testing or other people entering your life or supportive counseling. Don't hesitate to get the support. I think all of us can use it at this time, no matter what's going on diagnostically. And so some of this it'll be interesting to see in the literature, in the diagnostic literature too, like what are the new trends? We think that anxiety is going to be the highest rising clinical diagnosis over time. And for a lot of people, they'll start in treatment as adjustment disorder, and then we'll kind of continue to build their coping skills and decide later if that's going to be a more sort of severe level of diagnosis or if that's going to resolve itself. Most adjustment disorders do resolve within 3 to 6 months. So that time in treatment kind of helps us determine that too.
That's great. Thank you. And I think, like you said, I've heard of that adjustment disorder before too. That makes a lot of sense. And it may just be that in this acute period of time, you need help. I think of people that, may have a barrier to getting help, feeling like, I don't know, sometimes there's that resistance to wanting to admit that you need help. But I feel like now is the time, like you said, where it's so normal for just about every one of us to need help with this situation, because it's so strange, it's so abnormal, and the things that it's making us have to do in our lives and deal with are just, in many ways, like honestly almost impossible to like manage, right? So I give a lot of credit to parents right now, and navigating this with kids at home and school and all of these questions of, what's it going to look like, and how do we try and give our kids, some more stability and a more sense, a greater sense of security.
One of the cool things that's like kind of trendy with teens right now is that they're okay talking to each other about their therapist. We get a lot of client referrals from people already in care, but sometimes teenagers are talking to their friends about their therapist, and they're calling us saying, I want to start treatment. I hear therapy is awesome and my friend's getting so much support. And so, unlike previous generations, too, I think hopefully they're helping us kind of normalize going to therapy, getting extra support, lowering the stigma. Understanding, like I said, we all have mental health, and it's and it's on a spectrum any given day, and we're all trying to do our best, but more support cannot be a bad thing at this time.
Oh,
That's for sure.
awesome. That's awesome. I am going to try to just share my screen real quick so I can show a little bit about what we have going on here. Let's see.
Okay,
I think
great.
it's going to work. Well, maybe it won't work. I want to continue, and maybe that'll work. I don't know. Allow Zoom. I guess it's not going to work for me right now. Well, I will tell you guys just real briefly, as far as you alluded to a lot of the stuff that we're doing this fall for students, Kara, and talking about, the importance of not leaving parents on their own to try and tackle the education from home, and, helping kids with distance learning and homework and all of that stuff, as that can definitely get in the way of supporting kids in other areas, especially with like emotional needs too. We are offering a virtual school for grades 1 through 5 as a very personalized experience. Limited class size, so up to 10 students with options for one-to-one and even smaller semi-private groups of 4 to 6 students. That is going to be a combination of a virtual curriculum and a hands-on, like more tactile learning experience. And we're including things like movement breaks, and we always do mindful breathing exercises in our sessions, so that'll be part of our learning day. And just really getting kids, back to pencil and paper, and, reading books and discussion, and bringing those elements into the virtual classroom. So it's less of a distance learning experience and more of like just a virtual classroom, what you would do in a classroom, only everybody's remotely participating. So that's our private school that we are enrolling for right now, but we're also supporting students that are staying enrolled in their regular schools in both learning pods, where we're providing teachers for groups of students that are typically friends in the same classes at school and working at a family's home. And we can provide the teacher then to facilitate the school day. And, whether that's because of parents working or just parents wanting to, have more of a experienced teacher in the mix. And also thinking of facilitating a social experience. And I know there's still health concerns with that. We have a safe reopen plan and protocols that we'll be putting into place to make sure that everyone feels safe with that interaction. And then, of course, we have our one-on-one tutoring. So that's what we've always done, and we've been doing it virtually since March. It's been going really great. We're also very busy booking up sessions for fall, and we've had kids going all through summer too, to just try and stay on top of that, COVID slide, I guess what it's called now. But yeah, so if you need any help at all with your child's schooling this fall, let us know. I'll be happy to chat with you, and you'll have a contact form too that we can connect you with in our follow-up email when we'll be sharing the recording of this. And any other resources, I think we talked about psychoeducational testing. I've got them all noted here. So anyhow, that's a wrap for our time tonight. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you, Kara. This was really fantastic. I learned a lot, and I know I've gotten some thank yous here in the chat box. I think everybody else really appreciated it too.
Great. I'm glad it was helpful.
Thank you. Well, everyone have a great night. Good luck with everything, and we will hopefully be in touch with you soon.